Let's study carbohydrates. The word literally means hydrates of carbon. They are consists of long chains of carbon that have water molecules attached to them. Sometimes they are also called polyhydroxyaldehydes as at least one of the carbon in the chain has an aldehyde group attached to it. This is an aldehyde group. Sometimes they are also called polyhydroxyketones as at least one of the carbon in the chain has a keto group attached to it. This is a keto group. Now, carbohydrates are present in almost everything we eat. People who are trying to watch their weight sometimes follow a ketogenic diet in which they try to consume carbohydrates containing this keto group rather than the aldehyde group. Note that these ketogenic carbohydrates are not very good for our health and they can lead to really bad consequences. Carbohydrates are of three main types: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Mono means one and saccharon is a Greek word that means sugar. So monosaccharide means single sugar. It looks like this. Disaccharides mean two sugars. Disaccharides are basically two monosaccharides joined together by a glycosidic bond. Then again in polysaccharides, poly means one and saccharon means sugar. Polysaccharides are really large molecules in which large number of monosaccharides are joined together to form long chains, just like this. Now let's talk about monosaccharides. Three most common monosaccharides are glucose, galactose, and fructose. Glucose is the primary source of energy for our body. No matter whatever carbohydrate we consume, our body first converts it into glucose and then extracts energy from it. Fructose is most commonly found in fruits. Whatever fruit tastes sweet, it means fructose is present in it. You can remember these three monosaccharides by a really cool mnemonic GGF or great grandfather. The chemical formula of these three monosaccharides is same, which is C6H12O6. In all the carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen are present in the ratio 1:1. Now let's look at the structure of glucose. Glucose consists of 6 carbon atoms. Carbon number 1 has an aldehyde group attached to it, and the third carbon has an OH group attached on the left side. The remaining carbon atoms have OH group attached on the right side. Each carbon atom has to make 4 bonds, so the remaining bonds are formed with hydrogen atoms. So this is the linear structure of glucose. All these monosaccharides in aqueous solution exist in the form of rings, which means that when we add glucose to water, this bond of oxygen shifts here and connects to the carbon number 5. So we get a ring structure like this. Note that this OH group from carbon 5 attaches to carbon number 1 in the ring structure. And there is a convention that whatever is attached on the right side on the linear structure goes on the down side of the carbon atoms in the ring. Now let's look at the structure of galactose. Just like glucose, it has 6 carbon atoms. Carbon number 1 has an aldehyde group attached to it. Carbon number 3 has an OH group on the left side, but in addition to that, carbon number 4 also has an OH group attached on the left side. The remaining structure is just like that of glucose. In an aqueous solution, galactose forms a ring structure just like that of glucose. Now let's look at the structure of fructose. Just like glucose, it has also 6 carbon atoms, but instead of an aldehyde group, it has a keto group on carbon number 2. And then carbon number 3 has an OH group attached on the left side, and the remaining structure is just like that of glucose. In aqueous solution, fructose also form rings, but that ring is a little bit different than glucose and galactose. This bond from oxygen shifts here and connects to the carbon number 5. And the ring thus formed is 5-cornered, just like this. Now let's discuss disaccharides. Disaccharides are the sugars that are formed when two monosaccharides are linked together through a glycosidic bond. The three most common disaccharides are sucrose, maltose, and lactose. Sucrose is the table sugar. It's the sugar that we commonly use in our kitchen. And lactose is the sugar present in milk. Our body has an enzyme called lactase which breaks down the lactose in milk. So people who are lactose intolerant, they don't have this enzyme lactase. That's why their body cannot digest milk or any other milk product. You can remember the name of these three disaccharides by a mnemonic SML or small spelled weirdly. Now remember the three monosaccharides that we discussed earlier? These three disaccharides are formed by different combinations of these three monosaccharides. For example, when glucose combines with galactose, the disaccharide formed is lactose. You can remember this from the fact that lactose is present in the name galactose itself. Secondly, when glucose combines with another molecule of glucose, the disaccharide thus formed is maltose. And thirdly, when glucose combines with a molecule of fructose, the disaccharide thus formed is sucrose. And remember, fructose is the sugar present in fruits and sucrose is the table sugar. And you can remember this equation by GF gives S, or your great friend sucks, or maybe something better. Use your imagination. Now let's look at this chemical reaction. Remember, the monosaccharides are usually present as rings. So let's draw the ring structure of glucose. Remember, its carbon number 3 has OH group present on the upper side. And then let's draw galactose. Its carbon number 3 and 4 has OH group attached on the upper side. So these OH groups from both these monosaccharides combine together to give a water molecule, and these two ring structures are joined together through a covalent bond, which is called glycosidic bond. This glycosidic bond is basically an ether linkage in which an oxygen atom is combined to a carbohydrate on one side and any other molecule on the other side. And that other molecule can even be a carbohydrate as well. In all the macromolecules present in our body, there are present long chains of carbon atoms which are covalently bonded to hydrogen atoms and other functional groups. So in convention, we draw these carbon chains attached to hydrogen atoms as straight lines, and we draw the functional groups separately. So for this equation where glucose combines with fructose to give sucrose, let's draw the ring structure as straight lines. Remember, at each corner there is a carbon atom present, which we are not drawing here. And then this 5-cornered ring is fructose. And these two OH groups react together to give a water molecule. And the disaccharide formed like this is sucrose. This is the glycosidic bond formed between the two monosaccharides. And here we have a sucrose molecule. I have a question for you. Can you draw the structures for the third equation where glucose combines with another glucose to give maltose? Now let's discuss polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are formed by long chains of monosaccharides linked together through a glycosidic bond. 4 main types of polysaccharides are starch, glycogen, cellulose, and chitin. Let's discuss starch first. As we all know, plants in the presence of sunlight and oxygen can prepare their own food through a process called photosynthesis. That food is basically glucose. But plants don't use all of the energy produced during a day. Instead, they store the excess amount of energy in the form of starch. That's basically how they survive on cloudy days. So, starch is formed when glucose molecules link together to form long chains. Starch is basically made up of 2 main types of molecules, amylose and amylopectin. Amylose is basically just glucose linked together in long chains, and carbon number 1 of one glucose molecule is attached to carbon number 4 of the adjacent molecule through a glycosidic bond. Amylopectin also has long chains of glucose molecules, but in addition to the glycosidic linkage between carbon 1 and carbon 4 of adjacent glucose molecules, it also has cross linkages between carbon number 1 of one glucose molecule and carbon number 6 of the glucose molecule present below it. And plants usually store starch in roots, tubers, fruits, and seeds. And some example of starch-rich foods are potatoes, rice, corn, and bread. Now let's talk about glycogen. Just like plants store their excess amount of energy as starch, animals store their excess amount of energy as glycogen. It also consists of long chains of glucose molecules linked together through glycosidic bonds. They also have cross linkages between carbon number 1 of one glucose molecule and carbon number 6 of the glucose molecule present below it. Just like the amylopectin molecule in starch. Animals mostly store starch in their livers and muscles. Now let's talk about cellulose. Cellulose provides structure and support to plant cells. As we know that plants do not have a skeletal system or bones, so it is cellulose that provides support and rigidity to the plant cells. Cellulose is also a polymer of glucose molecule. It is a little bit different than starch, as in cellulose, every other glucose molecule is inverted upside down. You can see the alternate glucose molecules in this chain. The oxygen molecule and carbon number 6 are on the lower side. Due to this reason, the glycosidic linkage present here is called beta 1 glycosidic bond, and this bond is quite different than the bond present in starch and glycogen, and it's very difficult to break as well. We need a special enzyme called cellulase to break this enzyme. We do not have this enzyme, but herbivores who solely rely on plants for food have this enzyme in their digestive system, and they can easily break down cellulose in plant cells. Now let's discuss chitin. Chitin is a polymer of glucose-like molecule which at its carbon number 2 has a nitrogen group present, which is further attached to two other carbon atoms, as you can see here. This molecule is repeated again and again to form long chains, just like many other polysaccharides that we have discussed earlier. Just like cellulose provides structural integrity to plant cells, chitin provides strength to insects and is present in their exoskeleton. Do you know what an exoskeleton is? We and other animals have endoskeleton, which is present inside our skin, but insects have exoskeleton, which is present outside their skin. It is also a little bit different than endoskeleton. It does not grow with the body, so insects have to shed their exoskeleton from time to time in a process called molting. Now let's overview these four main polysaccharides. These first two polysaccharides, glycogen and starch, are used to store excess energy, and cellulose and chitin have structural roles. Starch and cellulose are present in plants, while glycogen is present in animals and chitin is present in insects. So that's everything that you need to know about carbohydrates. I hope this helps.